Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. Of course, we know about Modi and we know that Indian relationship as far as India and US is concerned, and the recent deal as far as the FS-35 and jets between US and India is concerned. We'll be talking about the ramifications overall of this deal globally. Does it standing alone, and of course the visit as far as Modi and Trump is concerned, the relationship and how it resonates within the region. As far as Pakistan is concerned, as far as China is concerned, of course, whereas China and US is concerned, and how the US wants to play it as far as India versus China is concerned. All of that today, the ramifications overall and the kind of ripple effect that this will have or can have potentially. All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Jauhar Saleem, who's President IRS and former Foreign Secretary. Thank you for being with us today. Pleasure. We also have with us Dr. Jamil Ahmed, who's a former ambassador. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Adnan Sarwar, who's a foreign affairs expert. Thank you. He'll also be joining us in a little bit during the course of the program. Jauhar Sahab, we were earlier also talking about this, the significance of this deal first of all. How do you look at it, and do you think it's going to have an impact on our region particularly as far as Pak-India relationship is concerned?
Definitely. I think it's an important development. It's a very significant development, and we have to take cognizance of that because we have seen that for the last 2 decades, at least since Obama years, we have seen the US shift towards India in our region, and in fact globally as well. And then they made India a strategic partner in terms of their strategy against China, the China containment policy in effect, which they call the Indo-Pacific strategy. Now India, after that, what they started doing was they started enhancing their defense relations with India, their strategic political relations with India, their trade with India, and overall in the institutional mechanisms. For instance, India became a member of Quad, it became a member of other such organizations which are basically meant to contain China. And India was seen as a counterweight to China, and the US basically their policy was to build India so that it could stand. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now in this, what we see now is that very sophisticated technologies are going to be provided to India. For instance, in the realm of defense, they're talking about the 5th generation fighter aircrafts, F-35s. Now this is serious, because if they get those, then whatever deterrence, strategic deterrence, or rather the conventional deterrence in particular that we have with India, that will be totally imbalanced. It will get totally unbalanced. Secondly, in many other, like for instance, for naval technologies, they've been talking about certain areas where America has not shared technologies with literally anybody.
So you're saying that this could be a starting point of more technology, or part of a plan to share perhaps unparalleled technology with India? Yeah,
there are 3 or 4 facets of it. What have they done? They have come up with programs like Compact, where this, which is like for catalyzing of cooperation between India and the US in many areas. Then something they call Trust, Then of course in the realm of defense, I've already mentioned, very sophisticated technologies, both in terms of air warfare, in terms of ground warfare, in terms of naval warfare. Some of the best technologies that America has. Then again, in economic terms, they're talking about raising their trade to $500 billion. Even now they have a couple of $100 billion worth of trade. Now that would be of course, that would be a totally new territory, so to speak. Then again, they're talking about these technology transfers in so many areas, sophisticated technologies, for instance, AI. Already what we see is in the field of IT, there is a huge collaboration between the US companies, the top tech companies, the big tech so-called, and India. In fact, many of the companies have half of their operations in India, and they are built Indian cities like anything. So now this milestone, what they're doing now, will further accelerate that.
Let me include Dr. Jamil in this also. Dr. Jamil, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Dr. Jamil, is it like Jauhar Saab is saying, is this going to be, a next level kind of cooperation, the start of it? Because, earlier on we had this conversation whether Biden administration was perhaps, when we look at the kind of engagement that India had earlier on, under the Biden administration, this is a new chapter, a more, perhaps a more dynamic one, and as far as under the Trump administration is concerned. Would you agree with that?
Well, the trajectory definitely is going higher and higher in terms of the collaboration and cooperation between India and US and its allies. And there is a purpose for it. My colleague, Ambassador Jauhar, has already mentioned some of the points, and I'll contribute some more points in it. Basically, the number one foreign policy priority of United States now is the containment of China. And the reason for that is that the hegemony of the United States, it's now receding. The United States would like to maintain its hegemony. That's the natural the consequences or natural course of action by any country. The nations are not going to lose their power or supremacy or the hegemony. So that's this transitional period, because it already started. The other countries like China, Russia, and in particular China, they have now attained a trajectory of a world powerhouse for the trade, which is they have the trade which is the highest volume since 2013, and the manufacturing part, they are the manufacturer, number one manufacturer since 2010. And now their economy is about 18 to 22 trillion dollars economy. And this, any economic growth has to be protected by its military power. And the US is obviously quite concerned about China's rise.
When you talk about protecting, this kind of, technology which you're talking about, isn't it true that Trump has also said that this is a prelude? I mean, they probably need to purchase a lot more technology, and that probably will be a prelude to this F-35 technology that they will eventually share with India. Do you think that the result might be that the US will probably be the major beneficiary of this deal?
US, so far as military industry is concerned, yes, it's thriving on all these conflicts and all these competitions and all these wars. Now, the US military industry is billions and billions of dollars of industry, right? And then the US, Donald Trump, even during his last tenure, he was doing a wonderful marketing of all the armaments and the ships and the planes and the military equipment, while he was showing the leaflets to MBS last, it was 2019 around that. So yes, he is definitely trying to get as much as he can for his country, and even by selling these F-37, F-36, and F-35, basically that's a strength technology, and this is top on the line, fifth generation aircraft, and it's going to disbalance the regional balance. And the regional balance, once it's disturbed, then obviously there are two nuclear countries. The other country would start relying on whatever power it has, including nuclear power. So that is the concern of the world, and that would be the concern of the world. China, so far as China is concerned, yes, conventional war, China is way ahead of India, and China technology-wise is way ahead of India. So there is no match to China. India, although is now with its allies, what they call a string of alliance, which is India, Philippines, Japan, Australia, and so on. So they are the string of alliance. They are trying to join their cannibalize their resources of military might, and they are trying to strengthen them themselves on the maritime line of the China. And Chinese 80-85% of the Chinese oil, it uses this maritime sea line. And if that is blocked, see what has happened by going into the agreement of AUKUS, Australia, UK, and US. This is a military agreement. And this military agreement is also involving a nuclear propelled submarines in this region, which is a matter of concern for China and China Maritime Line. And that's why China is trying to complete its BRI and more importantly, CPAC, because CPAC is much safer route as compared to the maritime line, and it also reduces the time from about 6 to 8 weeks time to just about 7 weeks time, from 14,000 kilometers to just 5,000 kilometers distance by road.
Let me come back to you, Ambassador Sahab, on that note. Jauhar Sahab, do you think that there is overall cohesion as far as Trump is concerned in policy? Because he's also said that tariff, increasing about 135% tariff as far as BRIC countries are concerned. And of course, India is part of that also. So overall, do you think there is a cohesion in his policy?
Well, I think what he had said was that, okay, if BRICS countries, they come up with their own currency, which, there had been some talk about that. And in response to that, he said he would levy those much tariffs. Now, that has not really happened yet, of course. I don't think that will be an easy path in any case. It's not easy, to have a sort of the new currency or a new payment mechanism, although they are envisaging it, but probably it's a long-term thing. So, but what I see is, I think, on a lighter note, there's a method to Trump's apparent madness, sort of, quote unquote. Some people have called it that.
Yes.
Because when he threatens, one day he would threat, for instance, we have seen in the case of Ukraine, he said, okay, one day he said it was Ukraine which started the war. And 2 days later he said, no, it was Russia which invaded, So basically, he's a businessman, in essence. And he can use all types of tactics to get to his objective. And his objectives are always the deals that he wants. And he's always looking for something to get from others, which he can bring to America. And then he could sort of, and he could then boast about that this is what I've got, America. So what I see is, I think, okay, India is part of BRICS, but BRICS is not there yet in terms of currency. So this type of tariffs probably will not happen. But the tariffs that have happened so far, let's dissect them a bit. He did increase certain tariffs. First of all, he threatened the neighboring countries, Mexico and Canada. But then, of course, subsequently, that talk was withdrawn as well. And sort of, then he sort of, from China, he said, okay, I could have 50 to 60% tariffs. That has not really happened yet. Maybe gradually he will increase the tariffs. On other countries, he said he would have 10% more tariffs, and he has imposed tariffs on many countries. But the type of draconian tariffs that he was threatening, that has not happened yet.
So you think that a lot of it is just talk? Yeah,
it is. Basically, it's not just talk. It's a tactic. He's not a strategician, but he's a great tactician. So he uses this as a tactic. He, like for instance, and we see in the case of Ukraine, he talked about this $500 billion deal for getting sort of, the rare metals and rare earths from when the Ukrainians initially just rejected that idea, then he came up with sort of, some very tactical talk. But subsequently, when it seemed that the Ukrainians are getting a little softer on that, then his tone changes as well. So we will see a lot of that. It will seem chaotic, but you will see that, Trump will try all these, he'll employ all these tactics to get the objectives that he has set.
Okay, and that is?
And his objectives are, in most cases, he wants to conduct a very transactional diplomacy. Okay. He wants to have transactional relations with countries where, and he doesn't want relationships where he would feel that some country is piggy-tailing on the US largesse or on the US power or whatever. Okay. And he has a worldview whereby Europe is doing that, and he doesn't like it. And he has a worldview where he thinks many other countries are doing that as well. So he will, one by one, he will change all that. And sort of, for instance, with the Europeans, he wants them to spend more on defense. He's also talking about, okay, if we station troops in your countries, you pay for that. He's asking the Koreans that, he's asking the Japanese that. Okay. So with each and every country of the world,
it's going to be
his relationship is going to be more transactional.
Right. Let me go to Dr. Adnan Sarwar Khan. Dr. Adnan, can you hear me?
Yes, right. I can hear you.
Dr. Adnan, Jauhar Sahib is saying that the nature of relationship that the US is going to have with other countries under Donald Trump is going to be largely transactional. Considering our history with the US, it's usually been a transactional relationship as far as Pakistan and US is concerned. Do you see our relationship changing as far as US and India is concerned in the light of Trump's new policies, so to speak?
Well, I believe that Ambassador Jauhar has very rightly diagnosed the situation and the psyche of the U.S. president. In fact, you see, he appears to be a Mako kind of a man, and I would term it as a deal-dealing president. And that he is really, as he has very profoundly said, that he is a tactician more than a strategist, long-term strategist. And in this initial phase, since his inauguration, I think he is also going to be very conscious about his speed. The speed is actually with which he is announcing the policies and all that. Speed is astonishingly very, very fast. And this is what is making the allies, what to speak of the erstwhile not that much allied countries, very worried. However, I also am of the view that slowly and gradually his speed would be slowed down because of not his nature, because of the stiff resistance that he would be facing from Europe, because European leadership just the other day has been saying that if he changes this whole range of security and foreign and economic and political policy towards Ukraine, towards Europe as well, that would mean that Europe would become even more united on its own, and it would mean that a little kind of a distance of Europe from the United States at this point in time. So this actually, I would say that this in the longer run would not be affordable by Donald Trump, because Europe has been an integral part of United States economic and particularly the military and security policy over the decades since NATO, and culturally also in the value system as well, in the political system as well. So I wonder how he can permanently annoy the most allied allies in the world of United States, the Europeans, the West Europeans. And so I think that he is likely to be coming into some that kind of a level, which will be finally a compromised level. Nevertheless, he wants to record his history in the American politics, particularly in the track record of the presidents, to be a very dynamic president who is going to enrich United States to a new heights and would become very popular in that manner. But this would be strange that how he can enrich the United States by making suffer the other countries of the world. And in fact, I would say that he is unleashing, whether consciously or unconsciously, whether by tactic or some 4 years term planning, a new Cold War, which is now based on the new economic Cold War. He would not go for war regime, but he is a type of a person, I don't know, well, it makes one muse as well, strangely enough, but not unrealistically, that he is trying to get peace by force, like in Gaza and in Ukraine, and you see bending the United States policy to 180 degree. And that Ukraine, in fact, you see, by facts and figures, was attacked 2014 and then Crimea, and now then 2020, this latest since 3 years. So let's hope, let's keep our fingers crossed. I think that this will finally lead to his unpopularity in the world leaders, though you see something may come into his way of some kind of enforced peace.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Adnan. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go to Dr. Jamil. Dr. Jamil, Dr. Adnan talks about an economic Cold War. Do you think there's a possibility of that under the new rules or the new direction of the policy that Trump is clearly angling towards?
Well, the economic competition has already started it, and whether we call it an economic Cold War or whether we call it the competition, it would amount to the same connotation. So basically, yes, economic competition, and then economic competition can transform into conflict. And once it transforms into conflict, then obviously the military might comes in, and that is where the United States sometimes gets, most of the time, gets quite concerned. And I'll come on how they are trying to dilute Russia's collaboration with China, but that's a different point. But let me make my point first, that yes, China and Russia together, they have almost started becoming parallel to the military power of the United States. And if we bring in equation the space power in which China and Russia, they have almost, if not taken the lead, they have almost come parallel to the United States. So that's where the concern have started raising. So coming back to the economic competition, which can really result into conflict, as I was saying, I was mentioning about the maritime line and about what is the percentage of the goods and services and the oil which is transported from the Indian Ocean or the Gulf to China. So once that is disrupted, China is not going to sit idle. Or for example, if Taiwan issue is again given some heat, then in that case, China is not going to sit idle, because China has already laid its parameter and laid its the kind of a red line that if Taiwan and if the forces come into the Taiwan, then China would definitely take the steps. Like in Ukraine, Putin had no choice but to go into Ukraine for that. So that is one part. And second is that, as I was illustrating in my last segment, that the world power now, this transitional time, once the United States is not willing to recede its unipolarity, which it in some respect, they still feel that they are the hegemonic power of the world, which in practical terms they are not. Now it's a multipolar world almost. So therefore, this competition would go on, whether it's in the shape of what is happening in the region in terms of the Middle East, or whether in shape of what is happening in Ukraine. But one thing which is slightly separate but connected is, so far as Gaza is concerned, Israel is concerned, whatever other dynamics, whosoever is the President of the United States and whosoever has been the President of the United States, the policy doesn't change. And Israel would get the full support.
Let me take Jauhar Saab's opinion. I'll come back to you. Jauhar Saab, on one side, of course, there is, this generic statement that we keep on hearing. One, what is the true status of affairs? Does the policy change or not, regardless of who is the president of the US? Two, is it, if it's going to change, and under a president that is known for his unpredictability as Donald Trump is, isn't it more likely to change than perhaps it would under somebody like Biden, for example?
Yeah. First of all, I think that this generalization that the policy doesn't change, I don't agree with that.
Okay.
The policies can change radically with the change in US presidencies, particularly when you have people like Trump. And we saw that, for instance, in certain areas, look, Trump withdrew from Paris Accord.
Right.
Biden got back into Paris Accord. Trump withdrew again. So Trump has withdrawn from WHO. He's withdrawn from other UN agencies as well. Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, which the previous administrations had taken years and years to to arrive at. And similarly, Trump now what he's doing in a lot of areas, he's doing just the opposite of what, for example, let's take the case of Ukraine. On Ukraine, Biden had a very clear policy, and that was that they would support Ukraine to the extent they would drag the war in Ukraine, but they would ensure that the Russians do not really get all that they want, because they thought that would threaten Europe. Now Trump is actually, and I had made this prediction just even before the elections. I had said on 2 areas you can rest assured that in Ukraine the peace would be more on Russia's terms if Trump comes to power, which again I had said was that, you would remember that, I had said Trump would win the elections, and on Ukraine he would be very close to Russia's point of view. The peace would be on Russia's term mostly, and on Palestine, on the Gaza issue.
It would be on Israel's terms.
It would be on Israel's terms. That's what I had said. And this is what you'll see what will happen. Now, there was on Israel, we know there's a bipartisan support in America to Israel. But now, in terms of the conflict, I mean, in terms of the shades, there is quite a significant difference. Republicans, and particularly Trump, is much more closer to Netanyahu and his point of view than Biden was. Biden was having a lot of problems with what Netanyahu was doing. He did not approve of that, but he was helpless in many ways because, it was a lame duck presidency in its last months. Similarly, on Euro-Atlantic relations, for example, America-Europe relations, that has been a pillar of America's foreign policy. That Euro-Atlantic relationship is crucial for stability in the world and for defense against the USSR and now the Russians, formerly the USSR and now the Russians. But Trump doesn't believe in that. Trump, in his last administration, weakened the Euro-Atlantic relations to quite a significant degree. I was then ambassador to Germany, and I know how perturbed Germans were, how perturbed many of the European countries were, to the extent that they started calling Angela Merkel the new leader of the free world, which is always supposed to be the American president, because they said that Trump had literally given up that role.
Are they also, currently, are they as concerned now?
Well, definitely, they're more than concerned. You see, what happened at the Munich Security Conference, where J.D. Vance make a speech which many Europeans would take as literally incendiary, and it's an insult. Because that was not a speech, that was a lecture, from their perspective. I've stayed in contact with many Europeans, and I know how they feel about that. And I've been going to Munich Security Conference. I know its importance because it's like a policy statement by the Americans when they are represented there. But the problem is this, and this is again what I've been seeing for the last 20 years. The Europeans, they have tried many times to come up with their own defense mechanism, starting from ESDP long time ago to ESDI and many other initiatives. But they don't really have the wherewithal. The technologies are there, the money is there. But the problem is that for them to get unanimous on a certain sort of understanding is very difficult. And we see we just saw a manifestation of that, Macron, when Trump started getting so close to Russia again. Then Macron and sort of literally, because he's not even invited Ukraine in the negotiations that he's having with Putin in Saudi Arabia. So what did Macron do? Macron invited all the European leaders for a conference in Paris, the major European leaders. But you see what happened there. The Europeans could not even agree on the basic things. Like when the question came, okay, who will be willing to send troops to Ukraine even for peacekeeping operations? None of the countries gave a categorical yes as a response. So the problem is that Trump will keep on doing this. He will weaken in some ways the Euro-Atlantic partnerships, but I don't really see that the Europeans would be able to put their act together and come up with a credible alternative. So they will probably have no choice but to tag along with America, what they're doing. But in terms of the changes, yes, we will see significant changes in many facets of the US foreign policy, and in terms of what Trump does, in terms of repercussions of that for the world affairs.
Fair enough. Ambassador Jamil, there is, as far as Pakistan particularly is concerned, how do you look at, us figuring in the US foreign policy as far as our geostrategic importance is concerned, and considering the direction in which Trump is headed, and the speed at which he's headed there?
foreign policy is quite dynamic, and there we have a convergence in our discussion. It's dynamic, and then it is calibrated and recalibrated in view of what's happening around regionally or globally. So Pakistan has to also recalibrate. It happens to be Trump, and Trump obviously is president of one of the most powerful countries of the world. They have control over so many international organizations in terms of having their directors in them and in terms of having their influence on them. And Pakistan is directly and indirectly affected. So Pakistan has to recalibrate. Pakistan has to navigate itself from this dynamic geopolitical shift in the region and around the globe, and particularly after Trump taking over and after his policies, what one can so far interpret and read and what he has so far announced. And then we have to connect it with what he has been saying during his campaign. Not much he has said about Pakistan during his campaign, but his decisions will definitely affect. That part is quite very much clear that so many countries, including European countries.
I'm going to interject here. Whether Donald Trump says much about Pakistan or not, if on the other hand, for example, he's saying much about India, a hostile neighbor, considering that kind of a situation, his not saying much about us is also saying a lot. So in this kind of a situation, of course, we have our angling and our relationship with China. Where does Pakistan figure? How do we calibrate? Because that is what it is at this time, right?
We have to view it from the point of view of international law. Is it a sovereign right of any country, including United States, to have their bilateral relation with India? Answer is yes. If we are threatened and if our interest is compromised, whether it's China or Pakistan or any other country, due to those decisions, then obviously we raise an objection. And if there is a violation of an international law, such as the United Nations Charter, then of course we have the right to raise our voice. But none of it has happened so far. India and the United States, from Obama onward, has about 6 different very important and disbalancing defense agreement and other agreements. See what they have done. Their logistic naval base in Gujarat, their intelligence sharing, their joint collaboration, joint manufacturing of so many arms, ammunition, and even aircraft. So all those things are going to disbalance the regional power, which is, of course, objectionable to us. But perhaps there is no violation of international law, so not much can be done about it. But I would.
Let me come back to you, Ambassador, on that. Jauhar Sahab, there is one, of course, no violation of international law, but we're talking about international relations between countries. Yeah. We're talking about a balance of power. When we look at our, geographical position, considering a hostile neighbor. We are talking about our relationship with an old friend like China. We are talking about a country like the US, with it is, the superpower like the US, with a president like Donald Trump at the helm of affairs. Yeah. How do we navigate?
Yeah, Ambassador Jamil made some interesting points, but the fact remains that the international relations, like you said, they are not conducted as per the United Nations Charter or as per the international law. Because a lot of time, it's not breaking of international law or anything. It's about interest, and countries can change the contour and the tone and tenor of their relations as per their interests. And sometimes the interests converge and sometimes they diverge. Right. Now, I had said in many comments, in this program and other programs, that I see a more challenging phase of relations between Pakistan and the US, especially from Pakistan's perspective. And why did I say that? There are a couple of reasons for that. One is what was already happening, and that is that this whole Indo-Pacific strategy that I mentioned, China's containment and India's placement in the Western so-called strategic chessboard, that is there. So, and that is continuing, and it will strengthen in the coming years as well. Now, the other facet is where does Pakistan stand in America's sort of, like radar? So first thing that we noticed was, like you said as well, I mean, there was no mention of Pakistan. There haven't been any mention of Pakistan. The only mention of Pakistan that has been there so far was when Modi met the US, and that was not in a positive manner. That was again reference to terrorism and so. Right. So it is not very auspicious. But this is again exactly as we, or at least I expected. Now the challenge for Pakistan would be what? Number one, for Pakistan, America, we have to remember that USA remains very important for Pakistan. Right. USA is the biggest importer, the single largest importer of Pakistan's exports, number one. We have our biggest trade surplus of any country in the world with the US. Secondly, we get billions of dollars of remittances from the US, one of our biggest chunks in the world after the Gulf, perhaps the biggest chunk after the Gulf. Now, the third thing is, US still dominates the world institutions like IMF and World Bank and all those institutions. And Pakistan, we all know, Pakistan have been very dependent on these institutions, at least in its recent history, in fact, for decades. Fourth is, in terms of the sort of, the global chessboard of interstate relations, America continues to be the preeminent country. Right. And then fourth again, America, America dominates the world's financial architecture. With all that, it is incumbent and it's very important for us to have very good relations with the US. And there's a history of that, although the history is a bit checkered as well. But now I think we face perhaps one of the biggest challenges that we have ever faced in our relations with the US. And that challenge is that when the US is, if they get into either with us or against us. Yeah. I mean, I hope it doesn't happen. At least it will not happen to the extent that George Bush said that to Pakistan. But if it happens in effect, not in words exactly, that they will say, okay, either you get closer to China or get closer to us. Yeah. Now, that would be Pakistan's biggest, because China is again very, very important for Pakistan. It's the all-weather strategic cooperative partner, the biggest defense partner, the biggest trade partner, the biggest investment partner. So this is the biggest challenge of our times, how to have a balance between our relations with China and the US. Yeah. And I think that will determine sort of, like in many ways, the success of our foreign policy in the coming years. Now, if you'll ask me how can we do that, there are a few suggestions in that. I think we need to, first of all, we need to dynamize our diplomacy. That is very important. This diplomacy is the first line of defense of any country. And we have had a great past in that way. Let me
come to that. Do you think that there's a chance, I'm going to include Ambassador Jamil in this also, but a quick answer from you first. Do you think that there's a chance that we can also get, some kind of, military deal, not perhaps, to the tune of what India is getting, but, to give us some kind of a balance, so to speak?
Look, anything can happen. It all depends. You see, it all depends how the US views Pakistan's importance. Okay. Now, there's one thing I would like to mention here. There's some articles which I saw recently published by some important think tanks in the US, like CSIS, their people, which advocated something very interesting. They said that some of the essential minerals that the Americans need, the rare earth and rare metals, which now they're focusing on that in their relations with Ukraine as well, as we all know. The writer argued that Pakistan and Balochistan has a huge deposit of that, and America should now try to get closer relations with Pakistan so that the US companies could develop those, or at least the US could benefit from that. So, I mean, this is just an example. The point is, we will have to find some convergences.
Okay, fair enough. Ambassador Jamil, is it as simple? What we can do for the US really is going to determine our importance as far as Trump-led America is concerned. Is it also going to, because he is someone who also made, if you remember, a very famous statement on Kashmir, for example. So there are a host of issues that, of course, for us, importance of the US, it cannot be disregarded, which is, what Ambassador Jauhar Saleem is also saying.
In fact, yes, if we are referring to the Kashmir statement last time during the last tenure of Donald Trump, soon after that we saw what happened 370 and 35. So that fate we have already seen. But coming back on that, the more this drift from global the west to global south, the more it start inching towards south side, the more pressure countries like Pakistan would start feeling that. And how to navigate? Yes, the transition plan is very important, and I think our policymakers might be having that in their mind. If not, they should. That this transition plan, because we cannot all of a sudden, just one day wake up and just announce that, okay, now we are not with you, we are with another country, which is our neighbor and all that. But then there are certain agreements and there are certain bindings which you already have gone into it. So that transition plan, number one, is very, very important. Number two, about the mine mineral, about the resources. Yes, that's one part, because Afghanistan is full of mine mineral and other resources. Definitely, you are a country like US and the Donald Trump, who has mentioned, and then you just heard Ambassador Jauhar about Ukraine, and he says that we have spent so many billions of dollars in Ukraine, and we want that you should just lease out to our companies your mines and minerals. And on that, what a retaliatory remarks and the statement came from Zelensky. So yes, those very unprecedented statements, unconventional diplomatic approach by Trump, that would go on. In fact, throughout his tenure, we will keep finding that out. And I have another apprehension in my mind, China, US, we already know what is the competition and how, or at least it's a very complex and complicated, that how to navigate and how to really avoid this pressure during this drift of global west to global south, the way things are moving. But the more important thing to me in the present context is Iran. Iran, if it is attacked, because what he's trying to sort out Gaza issue, and he's trying to pressurize, which to greater extent he has pressurized. And I know the kind of pressure which our leaders from that region, they take. While I was ambassador, one of the very important top ruler of one of the countries says, ambassador, if you could tell your country that they should not antagonize the United States, and I conveyed in my in the prescribed manner to my country at that time. So yes, they have been coming to the pressure. They did that while I was describing that the U.S. would any president, past, present, or future, would find it very hard to change its policy in terms of support of Israel. And history has proved it because of the Israeli lobby and the way they have their network in all the organizations in the United States. In 1948, it happened. In 1956, Suez crisis, it happened. In 1967, Six-Day War, it happened. In 1912, it happened. 1921, it happened. 1923, 24. It is happening.
Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have today. Thank you for joining us, Jauhar Saleem. Thank you for your time. Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, thank you for being with us today. Dr. Adnan, Sarwar, thank you for joining us today. Of course, the relationship as far as Pakistan and US is concerned will and remain important, as it always has been. The question is, in the light of the new presidency, how does Pakistan navigate this relationship, considering other countries like China also, and of course the relationship that the US has with India, a neighbor like India, which is of course problematic from time to time. Pakistan will continue to revisit its relationship with the US depending on the reciprocity of it. Let's hope that we can build on it, and let's hope that it can be mutually beneficial for both Pakistan and the US. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perespective.